It began quietly, not with an explosion of discovery but with a whisper that seemed to move through the collective mind. People everywhere were starting to notice strange coincidences, moments that felt too perfectly timed to be dismissed as chance. Someone would think of an old friend and receive a message minutes later. A dream would unfold one night, only to materialize in waking life the next day. Something was happening, subtle, invisible, yet undeniably real. Elara first heard the term, quantum shift, in passing. It was spring, the air soft and new, when a headline caught her attention: "Once you understand this, reality shifts." She clicked out of idle curiosity, expecting another piece of pseudo-scientific fluff. But the article was different. It spoke of experiments in quantum mechanics that hinted at a strange truth, that observation, emotion, and intention might not only describe how we see reality, but how we shape it. The idea was intoxicating, that the universe was not a rigid structure but a living, responsive field. That our consciousness wasn't trapped within reality but entangled with it. She began reading late into the night, about wave-particle duality, observer effects, and experiments where expectations seemed to influence results. The deeper she read, the more she felt an almost electric awareness rising in her chest. If the observer changes the outcome, she thought, then maybe I've been looking at life the wrong way. Elara wasn't alone in her curiosity. Social media feeds began to flood with posts about this new understanding, a blend of science and mysticism, fact and faith. Videos with titles like, "How to Trigger a Quantum Shift," or, "Your Thoughts Create Matter," spread like wildfire. Comment sections filled with stories of people who swore they'd experienced tiny miracles, unexpected opportunities, healed relationships, moments of impossible synchronicity. Skeptics dismissed it as spiritual placebo, but others, quietly, privately, began to experiment. Elara was one of them. She started small, not with grand desires but with awareness. She watched her thoughts like a scientist, noticing how each one carried an emotional signature: excitement, worry, peace, fear. And she began to see the world mirror them back. When she felt gratitude, she'd receive kindness from strangers. When she spiraled into doubt, the day would twist into tension. It was unsettling at first. Was life really responding to her inner state? Or was she just seeing patterns where none existed? But as the days passed, the coincidences grew harder to ignore. She began to sense a rhythm beneath the surface of ordinary life, as if reality were a pliable fabric, shifting subtly to reflect her consciousness. Physicists had once called this the observer effect, but to Elara, it felt more personal. It wasn't just the act of looking that mattered, it was how she looked. When she observed with expectation, she found confirmation. When she observed with fear, she found evidence of failure. Spring became a season of quiet wonder for her. The world no longer felt mechanical but alive, interactive. She found herself walking slower, listening closer, smiling more often for no reason she could explain. Reality had not changed, she had. And yet, everything around her seemed to be changing in response. As blossoms unfolded and days grew warmer, Elara realized she was standing at the edge of something vast, not a theory to be understood, but a truth to be lived. The quantum shift wasn't about learning new facts. It was about remembering that consciousness and creation were never separate. She didn't have the full picture yet, but she could feel it. Once you truly grasp this, not with the mind, but with the whole being, reality itself begins to move. By summer, the quiet fascination that had taken root in spring began to bloom into something much larger. The quantum shift wasn't just an idea whispered in the corners of online communities anymore, it had become a cultural phenomenon. Everywhere Elara looked, people were talking about it. Podcasts, YouTube interviews, even morning talk shows, all buzzing about this notion that consciousness and reality might be intertwined, that life could literally change once you learned to see it differently. For Elara, this was no longer theory, it was practice. She decided to turn her curiosity into an experiment. Each day she would test how her inner state influenced her outer experiences. Some mornings, she woke with deliberate gratitude, feeling as if everything she wanted was already hers. On those days, the world seemed to open up, the right people called, opportunities appeared, things flowed easily. But on the mornings she woke anxious or distracted, the day would unravel accordingly: missed trains, curt emails, minor frustrations piling up like a reflection of her inner turbulence. The pattern was too precise to be random. Something invisible but intelligent seemed to be responding to her. By midsummer, she began keeping a resonance log. Instead of writing goals, she wrote frequencies, emotional tones she wanted to live in: ease, clarity, abundance, peace. She noticed that when she simply became those feelings first, her environment mirrored them back. It wasn't magic, it was coherence. Still, she questioned herself constantly. Could this really be how the world works? Was she fooling herself into seeing meaning where none existed? She started to follow researchers who tried to bridge science and consciousness, people like Dr. Elara Patel, whose studies on heart-brain synchronization suggested that emotion and attention could influence measurable outcomes in energy fields. Dr. Patel's words stayed with her. Greater than, your reality doesn't change when you wish for something. It changes when your nervous system believes it's already real. Elara realized that most people were trying to create from contradiction, affirming love while vibrating in loneliness, repeating mantras of success while feeling unworthy inside. They were speaking the language of change with the wrong frequency. The quantum shift, she was beginning to understand, wasn't about forcing reality to obey you, it was about tuning yourself so reality had no choice but to respond. Around her, the world seemed to hum with the same curiosity. Influencers promoted frequency training workshops. Companies began exploring how collective intention could improve team dynamics and creativity. Friends who had once rolled their eyes at her ideas now asked questions late at night: so how do I shift? How do I align? But Elara was learning that understanding wasn't enough. The shift wasn't something you did, it was something you became. You couldn't fake coherence. You had to live it, breathe it, embody it. By late summer, she had grown sensitive to her own energy. She could feel when she was aligned, the sense of ease, the subtle hum of rightness in her chest, and she could feel when she wasn't. Her external circumstances mattered less and less because her internal alignment began to feel like its own reward. She noticed that when she stopped trying to control outcomes, the universe seemed to organize them for her. Things she once struggled to achieve began arriving effortlessly. She would think of a need, and the solution would appear, often in unexpected ways. It wasn't luck, it was resonance. One evening in July, she sat by the river as the sunset painted the sky gold and coral. The world felt vibrant, alive, breathing with her. A thought came quietly, almost like a whisper: reality isn't outside of me. I am inside it, and it's inside me. That realization changed everything. The quantum shift wasn't just about thinking differently, it was about feeling differently, being differently. And once that truth began to settle into her bones, she couldn't unsee it. Every reflection, every sound, every interaction felt charged with significance, as though the entire fabric of existence was aware of her awareness. Summer became a living experiment in creation. Elara didn't just observe reality, she danced with it. And the more she understood, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about personal transformation. It was about something universal waking up, a collective remembering that consciousness had never been separate from the cosmos at all. As the heat of summer gave way to the amber calm of autumn, the brilliance of Elara's discoveries began to dim into something quieter, heavier. The season that had once radiated with synchronicities and effortless flow now carried a different rhythm, slower, denser, full of friction. She could feel it in her body before she understood it in her mind. Something was changing again. For months, she had been in a dance with reality, and it had followed her lead beautifully. Every intention had seemed to bloom on command. But now, things that once came easily began to resist. Messages went unanswered, opportunities evaporated, and a faint anxiety began to hum beneath her calm surface. She tried to stay grounded in the understanding she had gained, that reality reflects frequency, that her inner world is the origin of her outer, but maintaining that alignment suddenly felt like lifting a weight that had doubled overnight. At first, she blamed herself. I must be out of sync, she thought. I'm doing something wrong. She increased her meditations, doubled her affirmations, and reread the books that had first inspired her. But the harder she tried to recreate the high frequencies of summer, the more elusive they became. It was as if reality had gone silent, pulling back to force her into stillness. Autumn, she realized, was no longer a season of manifestation, it was a season of unraveling. The leaves outside her apartment began to turn shades of copper and gold, and every falling leaf seemed to mirror what was happening inside her. Old beliefs, old habits, old versions of herself were being stripped away. She found herself remembering her earliest fears, the fear of not being enough, the fear of losing control, the fear that all this talk of quantum reality was nothing but wishful thinking. These fears rose like ghosts she thought she had buried. One evening, she sat in her room with her journal open, unable to write. For weeks, her entries had been affirmations and insights, but that night she could only stare at the blank page. The silence felt thick, almost sentient. It wasn't punishing her, it was teaching her. And then she understood something she hadn't seen before. The quantum shift wasn't just about expansion, it was also about contraction. The universe breathed in cycles, and she was part of that rhythm. Just as nature sheds its leaves to conserve energy for the coming winter, she too was being asked to let go, to release attachment, even to the spiritual highs she had chased. She realized how much of her practice had still been rooted in control. Even as she spoke of surrender, she was secretly trying to steer outcomes, to make reality bend to her will. But now, reality was teaching her the deeper lesson. Alignment wasn't about managing energy, it was about trusting its intelligence completely. In the weeks that followed, Elara stopped trying to fix her frequency. She let herself feel the full spectrum: sadness, frustration, emptiness. Instead of judging these states as low vibration, she welcomed them as part of her human experience. And something remarkable happened. When she stopped resisting the shadow, the light returned naturally. Not as euphoria, but as quiet understanding. Walking home one cool October afternoon, she noticed the way the wind carried the scent of rain and wood smoke, how the light filtered through the trees in golden threads. The world felt softer, more grounded, as if it was no longer performing for her but simply existing with her. She smiled to herself, realizing the irony. In trying to master the quantum shift, she had missed its essence. Reality didn't shift because she forced it to. It shifted because she learned how to be still within it. Autumn was the great humbling, the reminder that power without surrender becomes struggle. And so she let herself drift with the season, trusting that even as everything seemed to fall away, something deeper was taking root beneath the surface. The quantum shift, she realized, wasn't linear. It was cyclical, alive, intelligent, much like the rhythm of life itself. And for the first time, she didn't feel the need to chase it. She simply allowed herself to fall with the leaves, knowing that this too was part of the dance. Winter arrived quietly, like a soft breath over the world. The chaos of autumn had settled into stillness. The air felt cleaner, sharper, as if existence itself had been stripped down to its simplest form. For Elara, this season didn't bring excitement or revelation, it brought peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything going right, but the kind that emerges when you stop needing anything to be different. Her mornings became slower. She'd wake before sunrise, light a candle, and sit by her window, wrapped in a blanket. Outside, snow fell in delicate silence, blanketing the earth in white. There was no urge to manifest, no need to test or prove. Reality no longer felt like something she had to manage, it had become a companion, intimate and steady. The breakthroughs of spring and the intensity of summer felt distant now, like echoes of a dream. What had once been theory had become embodied truth. She no longer recited affirmations or visualized outcomes, she simply was. The gap between who she was and the life she wanted had dissolved, not because she had achieved everything, but because she finally saw there was never a gap to begin with. One evening, as snowflakes danced outside her window, she wrote in her journal for the first time in weeks. Her handwriting was slower, more deliberate. Reality didn't change, she wrote, I did. The world is still the same, but I see it differently now. I understand it from within. It struck her how many months she had spent trying to shift reality, not realizing that reality was always fluid, always responsive. The shift wasn't in the world, it was in perception. Once she understood that she wasn't a separate observer but part of the very field she'd been trying to influence, everything fell into place. There was no line between creator and creation. The illusion of separation had been the only barrier all along. The quantum shift, she now knew, was less of an event and more of a remembering, a gentle unveiling of truth that had always been present. Consciousness wasn't a force acting upon reality, it was reality, expressing itself through infinite forms. When she felt that truth in her body, not as a concept but as a living vibration, everything around her seemed to shimmer with recognition. Her life wasn't suddenly perfect. Some days were quiet and slow, others brought challenges. But none of it disturbed her anymore. She faced both joy and discomfort with the same sense of reverence, as if everything, every emotion, every moment, was part of the same divine equation. She began to notice subtle beauty in the simplest things, the way light refracted off icicles, the hum of the heater, the scent of tea steeping. Time felt slower, richer, as though she was finally living within each moment instead of racing through them. She had stopped trying to control outcomes because she trusted the intelligence behind them. Life was no longer a puzzle to solve but a conversation to be listened to. During one particularly still night, she stepped outside onto her balcony. The world was silver and silent under a fresh blanket of snow. She closed her eyes and inhaled the crisp air. For a moment, she felt herself dissolve, not disappear, but expand. The boundaries between her and the world faded. She couldn't tell where her breath ended and the wind began. It was in that moment that the full truth of the quantum shift revealed itself to her. Once you understand that consciousness and reality are one, the need to shift anything vanishes. You stop manipulating life, and instead, you live as its expression. The universe stops being something you reach for, it becomes what you are. Elara stayed outside for a long time, her breath misting in the air. There was no need for words, no need for proof. She simply stood there, part of the infinite stillness, knowing that everything, even the quiet, even the cold, was sacred. When she finally went back inside, she didn't feel like she was leaving the universe behind. She was carrying it with her. And in that understanding, she realized the most profound truth of all: nothing had ever really changed. Reality had always been shifting, she had simply learned to see it.